Hi, Max. Can you hear me?
Okay, we are nearly ready to go. Sorry about that. All right.
Are you able to hear me?
Well, no.
No.
We just turn the laptop around and can put it that way.
Good. I mean, it takes, you can kind of like use it. Isn't that complicated?
Wondering what the hell we're doing.
Have we got any copies?
Let's just put the 2 pages.
Yeah, forgive me if I get personal. What?
Alex, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Max, we can't hear you.
I can hear you, yes.
Sorry.
I can
We
hear
can't
you.
hear you though. So just give us a moment.
Okay, so-
For the-
Thank you.
Sorry, we'll be with you in 1 second.
All good.
Can you say something?
Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Sorry, we're just having some technical difficulties.
No
over here.
problem. All good. All good.
Is it this thing here? Do you wanna?
No, everything was on clock for last week. It's now. Okay, going to try something again. Can hear you.
Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Hello?
You can hear me.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, why can't you?
I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we hear you, but not as we should. So it's on our end, it's on your end.
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone will be with you just 1 second.
We're all good.
There must be this something other reason. It's not this with the. Sorry. I just pressed this button.
Hello, hello.
The function is just AD. Right, volume. One of these is the.
Oh.
I'm very, very sorry. I'm just still trying to work out why I can't hear you. Okay. Rabbi, can you say something again?
What?
Is that coming out of there?
Back one out of there. Say that
Can you
again.
hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great.
No, we can't see you.
No, you can't see me. Okay.
I know how to spell that one. That's okay.
I can hear you in Brisbane.
You're on. We got you.
Beautiful, there we go.
Yeah, you got me?
Yep, all good.
Okay, fantastic.
All right, so Rabbi Alex, I just want to unnecessarily introduce you one more time. And it has been, so good evening, everyone. Good to see all of you, and especially so many returning faces. I know it's hard, you can't see the full gamut of the people here, most of whom have been here for every week. And it's been a really beautiful journey through the thought of Rabbi Sachs and with you, right? You've been guiding us through it and doing it in your own way, and it's a very, very special one. I know you've got a lot of really, really positive feedback and a lot for us to think about. And as you and I spoke about in discussing putting this together, we could have done this for 8 weeks, we could have done this for 18 weeks. And so maybe this is part one of this journey, and it's been a really beautiful one. And we're very grateful to you and to your time and to your expertise. And so thank you for guiding us. And I'm looking forward to this evening. And I geared in the email that I sent out to the community, thinking about, Elul is like 3 weeks away, and try to kind of kickstart our spirituality a little bit. And that's what tonight's about. I do want to take the opportunity to thank the Davis family for sponsoring Lilu Nishmat Gittel Bat Sarah. So thank you so much for sponsoring in her memory. And I'll hand it over to you, Rabbi Alex.
Okay, so first of all, thank you. Thank you to Rabbi Noam for inviting me. Thank you to all of you for your being so diligent in coming week after week. And by the way, I'm the guy who's like the twin brother of the guy who was here last week, the guy with the beard. So anyway, so I'm delighted to be back with you, and thank you. And Rav Noam is correct that really we could do this for very many weeks. So let me try and introduce what we're going to talk about today. Today we're going to try and meet, we've met Rabbi Sachs in terms of his eloquence about talking the power of words, how he tells us that the roots of our Western values come from the Torah, how the Torah has answers to the problems of Western society. But today I wanted to try and get into Rabbi Sachs and his relationship with God, his relationship with spirituality. And I have to be honest that this shiur, as I started preparing it, and the more I prepared it, it went in a completely different direction than I anticipated. And what we're going to see today is Rabbi Sachs as a very, very human person. I'd even say a vulnerable person. We're going to see a vulnerable side of Rabbi Sachs. And I think maybe that's great to see, because maybe we're all at some level, we all have our doubts and we all have our problems. And we sometimes say, oh, if only I was like him, I wouldn't be anything like that. And today we're going to see that side of Rabbi Sachs. It's going to be, I think, quite eye-opening. But I'm not going to leave you just with the vulnerable side. I'm also going to give you some of the resources and some of the toolboxes that Rabbi Sachs used in order to give himself strength, strength in difficult times. So I don't want to waste any more time on introductions. So I'm going to share my screen. I hope you've got the source sheets, and we're going to go into the first source here. And just 1 second. Just make this a wee bit bigger. Okay, so let's begin with this, what I called a lack of self-belief. I know that's difficult to believe, but we will see this in a second. We'll see this. I have a persistent lack of belief in myself. I mean, this, by the way, is an interview where Rabbi Sachs is interviewed with his wife, Elaine. And I think I've already mentioned, in a minute, we'll see it a bit more, how Rabbi Sachs always used to mention his wife in so many different things. But he says, as you can see, I have a persistent lack of belief in myself. There's some kind of pain, which is perhaps an inherited thing. There's a sadness in Jewish music, a kind of minor key that I heard when I was 2 or 3 years old. It's an existential sadness I can't eliminate, however hard I try. That's probably what allows me to communicate with people who are unhappy. First of all, isn't that amazing? By the way, Rabbi Sachs writes in his book, Celebrating Life, Rabbi Sachs writes that he believed in joy. He loves humor. He loves joy. I know somebody was in his office who worked in his office, and anytime there was a birthday, he insisted on celebrating it and bringing in, a schnapps for a l'chaim. It's like Joanna Benarosh, who was his executive director, said that once he heard her, they were in the car together, and he heard her talking to her daughter and said, "Congratulations." And she'd passed, she was in, I don't know, 6th grade, and she'd passed a couple of tests. And Rabbi Sachs said to Joanna, "Give me her phone number." And he called her to wish her congratulations. This, I don't know how old she was, 12 or 13. She was so embarrassed that the chief rabbi was calling her up. But he said, if you've got an achievement, celebrate it, right? So it's just so fascinating. The Rabbi Sachs says about himself, and maybe he was trying to fight it in some way, that he says, I've got this internal sadness. And then he says like this about his wife: Elaine is the balance in everything. When I was going through difficult times as chief rabbi, she was stable. It's not easy being the child of somebody in the public eye, and she was a source of strength and confidence that our 3 children needed. Elaine is joyous, positive, always finds the good in people. She is the world's finest antidepressant. Elaine and I met in 1968. I was studying philosophy in Cambridge and was deep into existential angst. Lo and beyond, I saw these 2 young ladies walking across the courtyard at King's College. I thought, this is the person most unlike me I've ever encountered. She radiated joy. He says, it must have taken me all of 3 weeks to propose. That's unbelievable. And I profoundly regret that it took so long. I bought a ring in Woolworths. I got on one knee in Oxford Circus. I never had the slightest doubt. We married when I was 22 and she was 21, which is just, wow, really something. So he actually incorporated this in his TED Talk, which I want to share with you. And we'll just listen to a couple of minutes, because he actually turns this into an important principle, which we're going to see. Hold on. Let's see if this will work.
Relationship, the us of identity, and the us of responsibility. So let me first take the us of relationship, and here, forgive me if I get personal. Once upon a time, a very long time ago, I was a 20-year-old undergraduate studying philosophy. I was into Nietzsche and Schopenhauer and Sartre and Camus. I was full of ontological uncertainty and existential angst. It was terrific. I was self-obsessed and thoroughly unpleasant to know, until one day I saw across the courtyard a girl who was everything that I wasn't. She radiated sunshine. She emanated joy. I found out her name was Elaine. We met, we talked, we married, and 47 years, 3 children and 8 grandchildren later, I can safely say, was the best decision I ever took in my life, because it's the people not like us that make us grow. And that is why I think we have to do just that. The trouble with Google filters, Facebook friends, and reading the news by narrowcasting rather than broadcasting means that we're surrounded almost entirely by people like us, whose views, whose opinions, whose prejudices even are just like ours. And Cass Sunstein of Harvard has shown that if we surround ourselves with people with the same views as us, we get more extreme. I think we need to renew those face-to-face encounters with the people not like us. I think.
Okay, so I think we got that point. But look at that, that's amazing. And look at his joy, and look at the fact that he says that deep inside himself, he feels he has a certain sense of sadness, but he's able to say and we should, please God, we should all have good relationships. Wow, what a wonderful thing to be able to say on such a public forum, but to also learn from that it is the people not like us who make us, who enlarge us. And that's what I wanted to put, this is what I put here in 1B. It is the people not like you, right, who make you grow. Okay, and you've got the link to the TED talk if you want, you can find it easily. The second question that I wanted to deal with, and this relates to the first, he's full of self-doubt. So what about failure, right? Sorry, I'm slipping in and out, but I'm going to give you another, I've got to share something else. Hold on a minute, just 1 second. Let me make sure I can do this properly. Yes. Here we go. So he was asked in a interview, and you've got the text in front of you, but I'll just let you hear it in his words. He was asked whether he'd ever failed, because we all look at Rabbi Sachs as being so successful, right? And Rabbi Sachs, he was asked, you've got all these honorary doctorates and you're called a Lord, and have you ever failed? Asked Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg from Boca Raton. I think I've already shared a bit of this. So let's listen to what he says here in this interview. You've got the text in front of you, but I thought you might as well listen to him instead of my voice.
Success after success, triumph after triumph. Have you ever experienced failure? Have you ever challenges that you couldn't overcome? And what gave you the tenacity to persevere?
I nearly failed my first degree in my first year in university. I nearly failed my second year in university. I was turned down for virtually every job for which I ever applied. I wanted, since I was a kid, to write a book. And I started at the age of 20, and I gave it every spare minute of my time. Even when Elaine and I went to a concert somewhere, I'd be writing notes during the interval or during the breaks between movements in a symphony. And for 20 years, I failed. From 20 to 40, I had a whole huge filing cabinet of books I started and never finished.
What changed? What
changed was I happened to be reading the George Bernard Shaw's preface to Plays Unpleasant. And I don't know, it's just reading, B'mikra. And it opens, if you're going to write a book, write it by the time you're 40, or forget it. And I thought, Mina Shamayim, somebody's telling me something, because I don't know why I happened to open that bit of that writer. So I thought, that's it. This is my last chance. So I wrote my first book at the age of 40, and a book a year ever since.
Wow.
Okay, so by the way, he loved talking about this topic of failure. He related to it, and he spoke about the idea that, we frequently don't succeed. He loved talking about the Post-it stickers, Post-it stickers. So he said that the guy who made the Post-it sticker was actually trying to make a glue, but the glue didn't work. And then he thought, okay, well, maybe I can use this as something else. And that's how the Post-it sticker was invented. So he actually said, sometimes when something doesn't work, you just need to look at it from another perspective. But let's talk a little bit about some of those difficulties, failure, loneliness, some of the things that we in life experience. So I'm already on page 2 of the source sheet. Yes, so let's take a look at this. Failure is one of the greatest gifts bestowed on the faithful. I'll just read this. Failure is a supreme learning experience, and the best people, the true heroes, are those who are willing to fail. Whenever a young rabbi comes to seek advice after making a mistake, I tell him about professional photographers. They take dozens of exposures in the hope that one will be presentable. A success ratio of 1 in several dozen sounds like a failure, but it's that willingness to endure failure in pursuit of an ideal that marks a true professional. In fact, that is not a bad definition of faith. One of the most empowering truths of Judaism is that God forgives our failures as long as we acknowledge them as failures. He doesn't expect us to be perfect. As Ecclesiastes says, no one on earth is righteous, as doing only right and never sinning. God lifts us when we fail. God gives us hope when we despair and believes in us more than we believe in ourselves. And listen to how he proves this. It's lovely. In truth, the great religious leaders did not believe in themselves at all. I am not a man of words, said Moses when asked to lead the Israelites. I cannot speak, I'm only a child, said Jeremiah when told to preach God's word. In other words, they all despaired, and who believed in them more than anybody else? That was God. God believed in them more than anybody else. So when you feel like you're a failure, don't feel that way, says Rabbi Sachs. All you need to do is to remember that others have failed before you and keep going, and God will help lift you. So I think it's profound, and I'd like to say something. I want you to hear Rabbi Sachs has self-professed that he didn't have confidence, that he feels a sense of deep despair inside himself. Let me maybe share this with you. A few weeks ago, I was in Yerushalayim at a very special evening. It was the inaugural evening of what they call the Sachs Scholars. They took 26 scholars who had known Rabbi Sachs and they put them together in a group. It was a very special evening we had with Lady Elaine Sachs and with many people who had accompanied Rabbi Sachs, his executive director, Simon Weinberg, and then his executive director, Joanna Benarosh, his brother, Alan Sachs, and his co-rabbi who was rabbi with him, Lionel Rosenfeld. It was fascinating. And the session that they did that night, they asked them each to choose something which epitomized Rabbi Sachs's midot, his personality traits. And it was interesting because actually Joanna chose his notion of celebration. But his brother, Alan Sachs, said a couple of really interesting things about him. And this is what he actually said about his brother. He said, Jonathan Sachs wasn't born Rabbi Sachs. And he quoted a very esoteric midrash, which is brought in the Tiferet Israel. It's not even brought in any midrashic collection. And the midrash goes like this, that there was a king who wanted to defeat the Jewish people. I think it was Balak. And Balak wants to defeat the Jewish people. And he says, can somebody get me a picture of their king, of Moses? And he gets a picture of Moses and he takes it to his, his prophet or whoever, maybe Bilam. And he takes a look at the picture and they say, oh my gosh, this person is disgusting. He's full of ego. He's cruel. He's mean. He's selfish. And he says, oh my gosh, this is what Moses is like. Why have I heard Moses is so different? And this king decides that he will go as a lone horseman and rides into the camp of Israel carrying the portrait of Moses. And he rides into the camp and he meets Moses and he says, gives him the portrait and he sees Moses and he says, whoa, this is an absolute likeness. But Moses, I've heard you're so humble and you're so holy and you're so good. How come, but my prophet says that you're cruel and you're mean and Moses says, everything that your prophet said is 100% true, but I've worked on myself. I've worked on myself and I've got over all of those negative traits. And that's what Alan Sachs, Rabbi Sachs' brother, said. He said, Rabbi Sachs wasn't born Rabbi Sachs. He worked on himself so much. He says, and every time I thought, I can tell you personally, when I remember Rabbi Sachs, I was a student in London. I was in my early 20s. Okay, Rabbi Sachs wasn't yet a sir, or certainly not the chief rabbi. And I remember Rabbi Sachs, whenever he spoke, he'd close his eyes. It was a little off-putting. He'd close his eyes. He'd talk with his eyes closed when he was having a conversation with you. Well, he stopped doing that. At his funeral, one of the Dayanim on the Beit Din, Dayan Binstock, said that when Rabbi Sachs wrote his PhD, he was proud and said, I've written it completely unintelligently. Nobody will be able to read it apart from the top academics. He was so proud he'd written in a completely dense, opaque, academic style. And now, how did he become this supreme communicator? He worked on himself. He worked on himself. Dan Sacker, the head of his office for many, many years, said that when he was first employed, the first day at job, Rabbi Sachs sent him a Devar Torah that he had written for Shabbat. And Dan, what do you think of this? And Dan wrote back, he said, it was fantastic. It was Rabbi Sachs. He wrote back and said, excellent. Rabbi Sachs called him in and said, I didn't implore you to tell me it was excellent. Please tell me 5 points where I need to improve, okay? And then send it back. And he did. He was completely shaking. He said, and Rabbi Sachs said, fantastic. I'm going to incorporate all of your suggestions. Rabbi Sachs wanted to improve. And that's just quite something that he wasn't born like this. And to me, this is a lesson for all of us. So let's go to the next topic, which is the topic of loneliness. And I want to share with you a particular passage. And this particular passage is the story of Moshe Rabbeinu. When the Israelites have already been a year at Mount Sinai, they're just on their way to the promised land, and they start complaining that the food's not good enough. And they want meat. And this is the point where Moses has a terrible crisis. Here, I'll read together with you, source number 3, loneliness. I've long been intrigued by one passage in this week's Parsha. There was something monstrous about the behavior of the people, and it induced in Moses what today we would call a breakdown. He asked the Lord, why have you brought trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you, that you put the burden of all the people on me? Did I conceive this people? Did I give them birth? I carry all the people by myself. The burden's too heavy for me. If this is how you're going to treat me, please go ahead and kill me. What does Rabbi Sachs say? This was the lowest point in Moses' career. The Torah does not tell us directly what was happening to him, but we can infer from God's reply. He tells him to appoint 70 elders. We're going to come back to the 70 elders who would share the burden of leadership. We must deduce that Moses' suffering was from a lack of companionship. He had become the lonely man of faith. By the way, I'll just say as an aside that in another one, he loved talking about this parsha, and it's clear to me that he identified with the loneliness of Moses, the leader. And in one place he says, what happened in the previous story? That Yitro, his father-in-law, had left the camp. In other words, everybody needs an advisor. Everybody needs a sounding board. Everybody needs a chavruta. Everybody needs a friend. And Moses lost his friend. And that's why he was so lonely. And now look what he says. He was not the only person in Tanakh who felt so alone that he prayed to die. So did Elijah when Jezebel issued a warrant for his death. So did Jeremiah when the people repeatedly failed to heed his warnings. So did Jonah. The prophets felt alone and unheard. They carried a heaven burden of solitude. They felt they couldn't go on. Few books explore this territory more profoundly than Psalms. Time and kind again we hear King David's despair. I'm worn out from my groaning. Or in the next paragraph, how long, Lord, will you forget me? Or, oh God, Eli, Eli, lama azavtani. Why have you forsaken me? And he says, at times of loneliness, I have found great solace in these passages. They told me I was not alone. I was not alone in feeling alone. Other people had been there before me. And just skip down a couple of paragraphs, I'll highlight where I'm going. I write these words while most of the world is still in a state of almost complete lockdown because of coronavirus pandemic. These are unprecedented times. Many are feeling lonely, anxious, isolated, deprived of company. I believe that isolation contains within it spiritual possibilities. We can use it to deepen our spirituality. We can read the book of Psalms, re-engage with some of the greatest religious poetry the world has ever known. We can pray more deeply from the heart, and we can find solace in the stories of Moses and others who had moments of despair, but who came through them. Their faith strengthened in the intense encounter with the divine. It's when we feel most alone that we discover we are not alone, for you are with me. To me, this is profoundly spiritual. This shows that when Rabbi Sachs felt alone, he turned it back to God. And he said in those moments, he prayed, right? I remember once Rabbi Sachs in a lecture confided in us that sometimes he needed to pray a mincha or a mariv, and he didn't go to shul. He said, I sit in my study. At the time, he was a rabbi of a community in Golders Green, and he had a study at the back of the garden in a garden shed. That was his study. And he says, I love praying by myself, just me talking to God. I love that direct encounter. And here you see that Rabbi Sachs says, when you feel lonely, you're not lonely. Now, here's the crazy thing. He came back. If you look up Parshat Baalotcha, almost every article in Baalotcha is about this passage. of Moses' crisis. And he gives about 5 different interpretations of this particular passage, loads of different lessons. And to me, it's so clear that he identified with this lonely leader. And I want to just give you one other reading that he has, and that's what you see in the next paragraph. Because what happens next in this story is that God says to Moses, I know you're lonely, so here, let me gather 70 elders, and they'll all come with you to the Mishkan, and they'll be around the tent, and I'm going to spill over. I'm going to take your spirit and spill it over. I'm going to amplify it to those 70 people. And the strange thing about this is that it says in the Torah, and this is, by the way, for those who need a reference, it's in Bamidbar, chapter 11, the story of Kivor Ta'ava. And when we look there, what happens? It says, Vayitnab'u v'lo yasafu. They prophesied once and never again. By the way, there's a second reading, Vayitnab'u v'lo yasafu. They prophesied and they never stopped. But let's take the interpretation that this was a singular event, once only. Rabbi Sachs says, what could that help? Once, 70 elders. And he said that sometimes you need a leader feel so alone, he needs to see the impact he can have on other people. And when he sees that impact, that gives him a boost. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, right? I recently, a few years ago, felt a bit of a down in my career, and I decided to give myself new direction. I would join a fellowship. I joined a leadership fellowship, and it was fascinating to me to see people who I'd never met before, and I'd been on a short fellowship with them. Then at the end, everybody had to sort of praise each other and tell each other what they felt the other person's skills and gifts were. For me, that was a very profound moment, because I heard total strangers reflect back to me who I was. It was very confirming for me, and it gave me a real lift. Let's see the way Rabbi Sachs puts it. Okay, here we are. 4, source number 4. God let Moses see the influence he had on others for a brief moment. God took the spirit that is on you and put it on them, so that Moses could see the difference he had made to one group, the 70 elders. Moses needed nothing more. He didn't need their help. He did not need them to continue to prophesy. All he needed was a transparent glimpse of how his spirit had commuted itself to them, that he knew he made a difference. Little could he have known that he, who encountered almost nothing from the Israelites in his lifetime but complaints, challenges, and rebellions, would have had so decisive an influence that the people of Israel, 3,300 years later, would still be studying and living by the words he transmitted, that he'd helped forge an identity that proved more tenacious than any other in the history of mankind. Now, look down a paragraph, and he says, understood thus, last 2 lines of the page, there's a message in Moses' crisis for all of us, and that's surely why it's recounted in the Torah. I remember when my late father died, and we, my mother and brothers, were sitting shiva. Time and time again, people would come and tell us of kindnesses he had done for them. In some cases, more than 50 years before. I've since discovered that many people who have sat shiva have had similar experiences. How moving, I thought, and at the same time, how sad that my father, Zal, was not there to hear their words. What comfort it would have been for him to know that despite the many hardships he faced, the good he did was never forgotten. How tragic that we so often keep our sense of gratitude to ourselves, saying it aloud only when the person to whom we feel indebted has left this life, and we are comforting his or her mourners. Which leads me to another great thing that Rabbi Sachs, so in other words, you understand the point. The point here is we need to reflect the good to other people, give them a compliment. And that's another principle that Rabbi Sachs really believed in. The idea, I've already mentioned it in my first class, the principle of gratitude and the principle of praise. That he said we have to praise people, we have to give gratitude. Gratitude is a real gift. So let me go into another text here, which comes from the book of Vayikra. Now, Vayikra is an interesting book. Vayikra means Vayikra al-Moshe, and God called to Moses. And it's strange because the introduction to Vayikra is there's a double statement. Usually we hear Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, and God spoke to Moses saying. But in Vayikra, it says Vayikra Moshe, he called Moses, Vayidaber Hashem elav, and God spoke to him. So why do you need two phrases? And this allows Rabbi Sachs to investigate the topic of a calling. Now, let me maybe say something here to all of you. I teach a lot of young people. I teach people who are in their gap years in Israel, who are 18 years old. I sometimes teach students who are 22, 23. And a lot of times they're saying, how do I find meaning in life? What career should I take on? The sense of confusion, how to find my meaning. In today's world, I think, sometimes people experience a midlife crisis. Sometimes the kids have grown up, they've left home. You spent the last 20 years raising kids, and now you say to yourself, okay, what do I do with my time now? What do I do at this point in my life? I've got a nexus point. I'm financially stable. Now what? And this is one of, again, I think this is a profoundly spiritual question, and it's particularly challenging in our generation, because I think in previous times, you trained to something and that was your career for life. But in today's world, people change careers several times frequently in a lifetime. In the old days, you didn't have as many choices as we have. Now, over the internet, we can see what they're doing in London, what they're doing in Paris, what they're doing in New York. And sometimes we have this sense of, I think we call it FOMO, fear of missing out. It's, we say, like, why do they have it so good? Now, by the way, one of the problems is social media. Things are curated, and maybe they're also having problems, but we just don't know about it. But we're aware of a lot more. When you lived in a shtetl, right, and you were the butcher and the other person was the tailor, that's what you're going to be. But now, when you see I once said, when we watch TV, we're exposed on television to the top percentile of beautiful people in the world. We see people who've got perfect teeth and perfect, faces and complexion, and then we finish watching it and we look in the mirror and we're like, Gewalt, this is just awful. I look like a wreck. Okay, but we don't realize that's not how normal people look. Even the stars, if they haven't got their makeup on, they don't look like that. So, we have a crisis of meaning. Rabbi Sachs is there. Rabbi Sachs is there, and he says, Vayikra el Moshe. We have a concept of a calling, but God didn't just call Moshe. He calls every one of us. And look at the gorgeous way that he talks about this. And back to the source sheet, finding meaning. He quotes the Rashi. Calling is an expression of endearment. It's the expression employed by the ministering angels, as it says, V'kara zel zev yamah, the angels each call each other. Vayikra, Rashi is telling us, means to be called in a task in love. This is the source of one of the key ideas of Western thought, namely the concept of a vocational calling. That is your meaning and mission in life. There we get it, right? Your meaning and mission in life. This is what you're placed on earth to do. There are many such calls in Tanakh. Avraham heard to leave his land. There was Moses at the burning bush. There was one experienced Isaiah. And now, let's, 1 minute. I'll just read. When we see a wrong to be righted, a sickness to be healed, a need to be met, and we feel it speaking to us, then we come as close as we can in a post-prophetic age to hearing Vayikra, to hearing God's call, right? From the perspective of eternity, we may sometimes be overwhelmed by a sense of our own insignificance. We're no more than a wave in the ocean, a grain of sand on the seashore, a speck of dust on the surface of infinity. Yet we are here because God wanted us to be, because there is a task he wants us to perform. The search for meaning is the quest for this task. Each of us is unique. Even genetically identical twins are different. There are things that only we can do. We who are what we are in this time, this place, and this circumstances. For each of us, God has a task, work to perform, a kindness to show, a gift to give, love to share, loneliness to ease, pain to heal, a broken life to help men. Discerning that task, hearing Vayikra, God's call, is one of the great spiritual challenges for us. Again, we have to hear the message. Every one of us can hear God's call, and we, in this place, in these circumstances, you, me, everyone, right? You might say, well, who am I? Well, you've got a child, you've got a neighbor, you've got a skill. How do we know what it is? Some years ago, in the book To Heal a Fractured World, I offered this as a guide, and it still seems to make sense. Where what we want to do meets what needs to be done, that is where God wants us to be. Isn't that a beautiful thing? Where what we want to do meets what needs to be done. Sometimes you turn around and you say, I wish things were like this in the shul. So, yalla, do it, right? Do it. I wish like things were in the community. I wish I could provide that. I would be so good if I could provide that for my grandchildren. Find a way to do it. When what we want done to do meets what needs to be done, that's where God wants us to be. Rabbi Sachs is telling us, and again, this is so powerful. Each of us is unique. We're all here. We are here because God wants us to be. There's a task he wants each of us to perform. And I think this is maybe partly his Chabad philosophy coming through. However, I find this phenomenally powerful. And just to talk about this again, this notion where Rabbi Sachs valued every person and told you to look at your life, right? I want to just illustrate this amazing. Rabbi Sachs was very into mentors and guides. He told in every possible moment his visit at age 21 to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which changed his life, and to visit Rav Soloveitchik. He wrote beautiful articles about his teacher, Rav Rabinovich. And for me, Alex Israel, he was a mentor and guide to me. And to anyone who sought his counsel. Here is an article called The Angel Who Didn't Know He Was an Angel. It's actually the story about Joseph. You remember Joseph was going to meet his brothers and he got lost in the field and he met a man. And the man, he said, where are my brothers? I'm looking for my brothers. He said, oh, well, your brothers went to Dothan, and off he went. And had that man not been there, Joseph never would have met his brothers, and he would have gone back to Hebron, and Joseph never would have gone down to Egypt, and maybe Jewish history would have been entirely different. So it's interesting because Rashi says that was the prophet, that was the angel Gabriel. And Nachmanides says that wasn't the angel Gabriel, that was just a man. When a man is in the right place in the right time, he is an angel, right? It's amazing. Rabbi Sachs then proceeds to tell an amazing story. He tells several stories. Rabbi Sachs then says, he says there was a man called Harry Truman. And Harry Truman had a business partner before he went into politics and before he was a president. I've actually forgotten the name of that business partner. But Harry, one second, do I have? No, I don't. And Harry Truman's business partner was a Jewish man. And when the state of Israel was about to be declared, nobody knew whether the United States would recognize the state of Israel. And Harry Truman's business partner decided to go to Harry Truman's ranch, wherever it was, and he knocked on his door and said, remember me? I want to tell you something. In a few weeks' time, they're going to declare the state of Israel. You're the president of the United States. You remember me? I'm your good friend. You have been born to do this. This is your role in the world. And sure enough, Truman was the first of all the world leaders to recognize the state of Israel. And in his memoirs, he says it was one of the most important acts of his entire presidency. And Rabbi Sachs goes back to this story and he says, perhaps this is true not only about the destiny of nations, but also each of us at critical junctions in our lives. I believe there are times when we feel lost, and then someone says or does something that lifts us or points the way to a new direction or destination. Years later, looking back, we see how important that intervention was, even though it seems slight at the time. That is when we know that we too encountered an angel who didn't know he or she was an angel. That was what the story of Joseph's stranger is about. And we all know Rabbi Sachs as an intellectual, as a professor. But here's Rabbi Sachs. Listen to Rabbi Sachs talking. about how you can hear God in the loneliness, and that how there are little human encounters you meet. You're meeting an angel, and how God has a role for each of us. Don't say you're insignificant. Each person is unique. To me, this is a really, really deeply spiritual. I mentioned that I would talk about gratitude, and he talks about this in his story about the Mishkan. I'll just read you number 7, and then we'll get to our last 2 sources. At the heart of the idea of sanctuary is what Lewis Hyde beautifully described as a labor of gratitude. His classic study, The Gift, looks at the role of giving and receiving of gifts. The Mishkan became the home of divine presence because it specified that it be built out of voluntary contributions. Giving creates a gracious society by enabling each of us to make our contribution to the public good. That is why the building of the sanctuary was the cure for the sin of the golden calf. A society that only received but could not give was trapped in dependency and a lack of self-respect. God allowed the people to come close to him, and he to them by giving them the chance to give. In other words, until this point, the Jewish people had just been receiving. As slaves, they received. As free people, God gave them water, God gave them food, God gave them water, but all they did was complain because they were used to receiving. You know, if you're ever a madrich, or if you have to lead, sometimes you provide and people just complain. But if you put people in responsibility, they become a partner with you in the leadership, and then they don't complain. Then they offer themselves in service. And he says, this is not just about the Jewish people. A society based on rights, not responsibilities, on what we claim from, not what we give to others, will always go wrong. It's why the most important gift a parent can give a child is the chance to give back. Or maybe I will say, he probably says it later, the chance of responsibility. I once saw a beautiful article that the best thing you can do in child raising is to give your children chores, to give them jobs in the house, because then they become partner in the house. Then they become responsible. So this is again another beautiful message: participation, gratitude, giving gifts, giving other people a chance to give you gifts. Beautiful. All right. I want to talk about God. We said we'd talk about spirituality. I think we've spoken a huge amount about spirituality, but I want to get to the core, right? And Rabbi Sachs has a whole book called The Great Partnership, which talks about God, science, and the search for meaning. And he's dealing with people who think that God can't be proven. And Rabbi Sachs says, you know what? You actually can't prove God. But you know what you can instead? You can feel God. I'll read a few lines and we'll see where we take it. God identifies himself. I'll start over here. God identifies himself to Moshe at the burning bush. Who are you? Asked Moses. God replies cryptically, Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh. I will be what I will be. This was translated into Greek and into Latin as ego sum qui sum, meaning I am who I am, or I am who he is. The earlier medieval Christian theologians all understood the phrase to be speaking about ontology, meaning the metaphysical nature of God's existence. It meant that he was being itself, timeless, immutable, incorporeal, understood as subsisting act of all existing. Augustine defines God as that who does not change and cannot change. Aquinas, continuing the same tradition, reads the Exodus formula as saying, God is the true being, internal, immutable, simple, self-sufficient, and the cause and principle of every creature. But, says Rabbi Sachs, this is the God of Aristotle and the philosophers, not the God of Abraham and the prophets. Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh means none of these things. It means I will be what I will be. I will be where or how I will be. The essential element of the phrase, as I mentioned, omitted by all the Christian translations, namely the future tense. Far from being timeless and immutable, God in the Hebrew Bible is active, engaged, in constant dialogue with his people, calling, urging, warning, challenging, and forgiving. God is always in flux, right? And he says, I'll just highlight what I'm reading. Construe knowledge on the basis of science, and with the best will in the world, you will discover only one aspect of God, the aspect that the Bible calls Elohim, the impersonal God of the creation. But the Bible has another face of God, the one turned to us in love. That God is found in relationship, in the face of the human other that carries the trace of the divine other. We should look for divine presence in compassion, generosity, kindness, understanding, forgiveness, the opening of soul to soul. Or look in the next paragraph. Faith is a relationship in which we become God's partners. And you know what, let's read the last paragraph here, which I'm highlighting now. Faith is not a form of knowing in the sense in which the word is used in science and philosophy. It is in the Bible a mode of listening. The supreme expression of Jewish faith, usually translated as "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," really means not hear, but listen. Listening is an existential act of encounter, a way of hearing person beneath the words, the music beneath the noise. Freud, who disliked religion and abandoned Judaism, was nonetheless Jewish enough to invent in psychoanalysis the listening cure, listening as the healing of the soul. To me, this is where, by the way, this already starts in the Kuzari. The Kuzari indeed said, I don't know anything about God. I can't philosophize along with Plato and Aristotle about God, what might be. I don't even want to talk about the God who created the world because I never experienced that. I want to talk about the God of experience. That's the God of Abraham. The God of Abraham is walk before me, lech lecha, go. The God of Abraham is the God who you could argue with and say, but that's not just. It's the God you can feel. It's the God who King David can say, as I walk through the valley of death, I will not fear because you are with me. In other words, a direct I-thou relationship. In other words, what Rabbi Sachs is saying, that frequently in the world, and even some Jewish thinkers were caught up by this, people felt they need to prove God because God is something objective that can be proven outside the world, beyond, unchanging. Said Rabbi Sachs, that's not the God of the Bible. The God of the Bible is always in flux. He's listening, he's commanding. Sometimes God feels pain. It says he's sad, he's angry. God's in relationship with us. Wow, that's a completely different God. That's Eheyah Sheheyah, I will be what I will be. I'm going to respond to you and you expect to respond to me. That's called the God of relationship. That's the Jewish God, he says. In fact, he says, really, there are two names for God in the Tanakh. Elohim, the God of nature, the unchanging God. Hashem, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which is a mixture of Haya, Hoveh, V'Yeh, a God in relationship. Rabbi Sachs's emunah, Rabbi Sachs's faith was one of having God right in front of him. And so as we finish this, I thought I would come to a passage which was in an interview with Rabbi Sachs just 7 years before he died. Rabbi Sachs was actually asked about death because the interviewer knew that Rabbi Sachs had battled with cancer. And I'll just read this together with you. Though he's, by the way, the interviewer was at the time working for Tablet, now he's writes for The Atlantic. His father's a rabbi, his name's Yair Rosenberg, and it says, though he seldom mentions it, Rabbi Sachs battled cancer twice, once in his 30s and later in his 50s. Yet unlike many rabbis and scholars of religion, from David Wolpe to James Kugel, who incorporated their bouts with cancer in their theological reflections, Rabbi Sachs made no reference to it in his voluminous output. And I asked him why. Again, I don't know if this is a good answer, but this is his answer. He says, it's very simple, he said. I saw my late father in his 80s go through 4 or 5 major operations. He got weaker and weaker as the decade passed. He was alive for my induction as chief rabbi, and that was very important to me. Now, my late father, Olav Shalom, didn't have much Jewish education. He had enormous emunah, faith, Sachs continued. I used to watch him saying psalms in the hospital. I could see him getting stronger. It seemed to me that his mental attitude was, I'm leaving this to Hashem. If he sees it's time for me to go, then it's time for me to go. And if he still needs me to do things, he'll look after me. And I adopted exactly that attitude. So on both occasions, I felt, if it's time for Hashem needs me up there, thank you very much indeed for my time down here. I've enjoyed every day and feel very blessed. And if he wants me to stay, there's still work for me to do. And then he's going to be part of the refuah, and I put my trust in him. So there was no test of faith at any point. Just these simple moments in which to say, B'yado afkid ruchi, in his hand I place my soul. That was my thought. And since we say that every day in Adon Olam, I didn't feel the need to write a book about it. It was, for me, not a theological dilemma at all. I had faith, said Sachs. Full stop. I don't know if we can imagine somebody as sophisticated as Rabbi Sachs having such simple faith. But what I've hoped to illustrate to you is the degree to which Rabbi Sachs so palpably felt the divine accompanying him throughout his life, lifting him, giving him a sense of meaning. By the way, everybody who worked with him said that he had a phenomenal work ethic. He felt that he didn't have a moment to spare, a day to waste. He was always on to the next project and felt if he was here on this earth, he had a job to do. And he clearly felt that sense of calling. He felt a need to work on himself, like we said, and to maybe take a sense of melancholy that he had inside and fill it with joy, with gratitude, with praise, with enjoying other people and realizing that the people not like us, first and foremost his wife, right, could complement him and could help create that amazing mosaic. But ultimately, right, in moments of loneliness, sometimes you turn to God. Sometimes it's other people who give you the boost that you need, right? But that God is found in relationship. And I hope what I've managed to give you today, I think there's a lot of philosophy here, but what I actually wanted to do was give us a more intimate image of Rabbi Sachs, an image of some of his own fears, delights, his inner faith. And maybe we can, be inspired to seek our own way as well. So thank you. And Be'ezrat Hashem, I really do. This has given me a real appetite to come down under and to come visit you guys. So I hope I'll try and see if I can carve out an opportunity. I'm usually visiting, frequently the US and the UK, but if I can make it over there sometime, maybe in next summer, next your winter, that's usually when I have more time at my disposal. That would be a real treat. So I'll see what I can do. Thank you. And thank you again to Rav Noam.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rav Alex. Can you hear me all right there?
I can hear you.
Cool. So again, on behalf of everyone here, I wanted to thank you for your time and for the beautiful journey that you've taken us on. You mentioned before this idea that Rav Sachs said, if he's here, then he's got work to do, right? And so long as he's here, that seems like Hashem saying you've got more work to do. It's kind of hard to hear those words because it seems like his voice and what he represents and what he stood for is more needed than ever. And so there is this great void that we are left with. But I think I'll echo what I shared a couple of years ago, and a lot of people have said, which is that in a sense it becomes our responsibility now, which is a scary thing. And none of us can be great like Rav Sachs. We can all be great in our own way. And when we come together and think about spreading his Torah and spreading his messages and empowering ourselves to continue to represent low battery. All right, to continue to represent what he stood for, I think that's a big part of this. So his voice is sorely missed, but thank God he left so much, and it's our job to internalize it. And so I'm going to empower all of you and continue to empower you, Rav Alex, to continue to spread your amazing Torah, Am Yisrael, and bless you with bracha and hatzlacha and everything that you do. And I want to just take an opportunity again to thank Max for sorting out the whatever you call this, the technology. It's worked so well. I've actually decided I'm going to be taking off for a couple of weeks, traveling overseas. But we'll check in every couple of days through this. It's great. It works well. What do you think? Yeah. No, okay. But as wonderful as this has been, and it's worked out beautifully, Rav Alex, we can't wait to host you in person here very, very soon. And again, thank you all for carving out time to learn Torah. And I want to again empower you all to continue to learn. Elul's coming up soon. book for the Tish. There's a lot more stuff coming, so stay tuned. And we're almost there. We're almost there. Thank you again, Rabbi Alex. Cool too.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Max. Yes.
Yes, how do you, where's your? Max, find your. Are there people sticking around? Okay, so then if I can get everyone to be shared on it. Over there.
Move to the second.
Deb, I'll be right back.